Good evening. Hello. You know, we come from a call and response community, so when I say good evening, you need to say it back. The first thing I'd like to do is thank Sarah. Sarah was a very early supporter of the IDB Wealth Society. She was an early believer in the idea that we were no longer going to wait for other organizations to train Black and brown journalists to do this most important work. We were going to do it ourselves. So I just want to give a shout out and thank you so much. All right, so this is the moment I guess we all been waiting for. I first met Ta-Nehisi in 2012. At that time, sorry to say this, James, but I was not a regular reader of the Atlantic magazine. I was a newspaper reporter and I mostly read newspapers. But one day I was walking past the magazine rack at the airport and I saw this cover story called "The Fear of a Black President" by some dude with a name unlike one I'd ever seen before, a name that I assumed, like the rest of the world, was pronounced Ta-Nehisi. And I grabbed the copy and then I proceeded to devour that article, thousands and thousands of words long, not once, but twice, back to front, literally reading the last word and then flipping back to the beginning to read this very lengthy article again. I was absolutely enthralled. I'd never actually seen writing like this. Now, I should admit at this point in my life, I'd never read James Baldwin or most of the writers that people consider to be literary greats. I just did not receive that type of education. I came from a household who loved to read, but my dad read Louis L'Amour novels and my mom loved Danielle Steele. And I loved Judith Krantz because they had lots of good sex parts in there. So I didn't grow up in a great literary tradition, and I guess depending how you define great literary tradition. So when I read Ta-Nehisi's words, they were so muscular and powerful, and there was this rage that you could sense in them, and it just captivated me because I felt many of those same things. I'd never read prose quite like that, the way it beautifully and hauntingly wrapped itself around a narrative that managed to be at once immersed in the past, but also all about what was happening right now. The reporting was singular and relentless. Reams and reams of paper had been spent dissecting the Obama presidency, but I'd never read anything that excavated the role of race in this presidency the way that that piece did. I felt his writing was not simply about Black people, but for Black people, and that he was far more concerned with writing the truth than assuaging white people's feelings. So again, this was 2012, the year before I just left my job as a beat reporter, and I was just beginning to dip my toe in long form. And here I was suddenly reading the exact type of template of the work I hoped one day to be able to produce. I was nobody, but I tracked down his email and I asked him if he'd come to ProPublica, where I was working at the time, and do a brown bag on the piece. Much to my surprise and excitement, you wouldn't do this now, but back then, now you gotta talk to his assistant. But back then, he emailed me back and he agreed to come. So the night before he was to come, I started searching for videos with him because I wanted to know how to pronounce his name. I was actually very afraid of mispronouncing his name. And every time I saw an interview, people always pronounced it a different way, and I couldn't find an interview with him actually introducing himself. So finally I found some think piece and it had a phonetic pronunciation, and so I practiced it over and over that morning, hoping that when the time came, I wouldn't stumble and forget which one was the right way to pronounce it. So that morning, ProPublica was buzzing, waiting for him to come. Everyone was really excited to talk to him. He was supposed to arrive at noon. 12:15, 12:30, 12:45. I didn't have a cell phone then, so I sent him a series of increasingly desperate emails. Are you coming? He did not come. That's right, the very first time I was supposed to meet Ta-Nehisi, he actually stood me up. And if you know me, you know how I have a hair-trigger temper, and so I was hot. And I regretted ever inviting this dude, thinking that, like many brilliant men, he was clearly an arrogant asshole. You didn't know this was a roast. Okay. But then a few hours later, he sent me an extremely chagrined email apologizing profusely. This is before the assistant, remember. He'd forgotten to put the brown bag in his calendar, and so we rescheduled, and he did not stand me up a second time, or I likely would not be on the stage introducing him now. The guy who showed up wasn't arrogant at all, and if you know him, you know Ta-Nehisi is quiet, he's intense but unassuming. And I'll never forget, for the next hour, as if no one else were in the room, he and I just conversed. No one else in the brown bag actually got to ask a question. And we talked and had the type of conversation that we would have over and over again through the years. I don't need to tell anyone here that Ta-Nehisi has an extraordinary mind, that he is an extraordinary practitioner of words. He's a writer who is truly dedicated to the craft, using words to excavate the harshest truths and the most devastating lies about this country of ours. He is a historian, a philosopher, and a critic. And it would be impossible for us to fully understand the implications of the Obama presidency and how it led to the Trump presidency without the benefit of this man's brilliant writing. His list of awards is rather ridiculous, including a National Book Award, a National Magazine Award, some little thing called a MacArthur Genius Grant. Sometimes I wonder if he has a clone, because he also is a script writer, a lay historian, a novelist, a comic book writer. I mean, you're probably the blackest dude I know and you're writing Captain America. I don't even understand. You all know that he's been called one of the nation's foremost public intellectuals, the country's foremost thinker and writer on race, the quote-unquote laureate of Black lives. But to me, he's really just one of my greatest friends. You see, people like to crown the Black writer, but while he's never shied away from the Black part, he's always rejected the notion that there should be just one. He's never wanted to be the one, but instead has sought to ensure a space for other Black minds. Ta-Nehisi saw something in my work before many of you even knew my name. He understood what I was trying to do, even if I did not know at the time how to do it. Today, still, he talks me off the ledge. I won't tell you what he says, but he's a great motivator. He talks me off the ledge when I don't think I'm capable. He pushes me, he motivates me, and has far more confidence in me and my abilities than I actually have in myself. You see, it's a rare thing for people like he and I, who come from the segregated communities that we write about, to be honored in rooms like this. His is the least expected outcome for a Black college dropout from Baltimore. In his recent book, We Were 8 Years in Power, Ta-Nehisi writes, "Our story is a tragedy. I know it sounds odd, but that belief does not depress me. It focuses me. My ambition is to write both in defiance of tragedy and in blindness of its possibility, to keep screaming into the waves, just as my ancestors did." People like he and I are never quite comfortable being in rooms like this. With having arrived where we are, and because I know him, I know you'd rather be anywhere else tonight but here. But it's such an extraordinary thing to be writing in conversation with you, my friend, screaming into the waves together. And I'm so very honored to introduce you, Ta-Nehisi, as you receive this much-deserved award for journalistic achievement tonight. So please welcome to the stage Ta-Nehisi Coates.